Hi, I'm John Matthews, veteran law enforcement officer, winery owner at Casaro Winery in Ovilla, just south of Dallas, Texas, and your host for the podcast version of True Crime and Wine. I'm pleased that you've joined us today for this very unique podcast where we feature the fascinating world of serial killers. Well, we enjoy award-winning wine. So why serial killers and wine? Well, the answer is simple. I'm the only winemaker in the world that's captured a serial killer. And 40 years in law enforcement didn't hurt. And no, I didn't use wine. But this is real true crime and real wine. And on each episode, myself and Brandy Diamond, the popular podcast host of Texas Wine and True Crime, we take out a journey profiling some of the most interesting and intriguing serial killer cases from all around the world. As we enjoy today a glass of Tempranillo. But we'll talk about the wine a little bit later, so pour yourself a glass of Killer Cabernet or Murderous Merlot and join us for this podcast version of True Crime and Wine. In this episode, we're going to take you on a journey profiling the life and crimes of Carl Watts, a predatory killer who hunted women in multiple states and killed them for what he said was the evil in their eyes. I want to welcome in my co-host, Brandy Diamond. And Brandy, this is a strange case because the killer would sometimes stab his victims multiple times. Other times he drowned them in their own bathtub. But really, from a serial killer perspective, he spent very little time with some of them. As a matter of fact, with one victim, he walked up to her, stabbed her in the chest, and walked away in less than 15 seconds. Brandy, how do you stop a killer who spends so little time with the victim and leaves almost no evidence?
I was just thinking the evidence piece of this, if they're not there that long, can't leave much behind, how do you find them? And we're going to to note that this guy had multiple 20 victims, over possibly 100 victims. And these are the most random crimes, John, just someone approaching someone and taking their life. It's very difficult to solve those kinds of cases.
It is, because they're crimes of opportunity in many cases. Sometimes he stalked his victims, but just decided at one point they had evil in their eyes, went up to him, killed him, and sometimes was gone in a blink of an eye.
Okay, John. So today we are talking about Carl Watts. I'm going to get into his early life. We talk about this at the beginning of every show. But let's kind of start with some of what we do know about him. Born November 7th, 1953 in Columbia, Maryland. He ends up moving to Inkster, Michigan at age 1. His nickname was Coral, and we'll talk about that, but his name, really, it was just a mispronunciation of the name Carl.
Right.
Classified as the Sunday morning slasher, so we'll get into that. The blue-eyed devil. You said earlier he thought women had evil eyes, so was eyes a thing? Interested to hear more about that from you. He is active, we know, from 1974 to 1982 is when he was committing these crimes. The number is staggering. So he has confirmed to at least kill 22 plus, but suspected of at least 100 plus murders. He confessed to 80 of them before he died, and he did die in age 53 in 2007 from natural causes in prison. Okay, John. So what do we know about his early life now that we know some facts about who we're talking about today?
Well, yeah, and he had two different nicknames, like you said, Brandy, because he really two different killing sprees. And when you start breaking down his crimes, there was a whole lot more than that. This guy could have had multiple nicknames in multiple states, but he did have some of those early red flags, like you and I discuss every week. An abusive father that beat his mother. His parents ended up getting divorced in 1962. This is really, really interesting. And this goes into research that you and I have talked talked about in Nature versus Nurture. So at age 8, he developed meningitis, and he had such a high fever that when he was brought to the hospital, doctors feared that he had brain damage. Now, the
Wow.
only reason I mention that is because we have seen some of these studies that are, linking or trying to link traumatic brain injury to, maybe predisposed in some of these serial killers. We've seen others that had a TBI as a young child and they changed. I really noted this because family said that they did observe a drastic change in his behavior after the illness, and that he experienced violent dreams, and as he grew up, dreamt of killing women because of the evil in their eyes. Now,
Hmm.
there's no way to tell, Brandy, if that was already there, if that was
Sure.
already in his head, if the meningitis had nothing to do with it. But I found that very, very interesting as we were putting together the research on this case. Here we have another instant of some type of brain issue.
Mhm.
And it's even more important, I think, in this case, because the people that knew him best said they observed a change, and it was a change for the worst.
Yeah, so as we always say, we don't believe in coincidences. You get meningitis, you get a high fever. Doctors had already said possible brain damage based on that fever. You see the drastic change in the behavior after he's sick. I mean, this is an 8-year-old child, right? So the brain is barely forming really
Right.
at this age. And so I would think there would be a correlation. And, not surprised about the dreams and the killing women. I've covered lots of cases, John, where they have taken their own lives, they've taken their families' lives, and then they come to find out that there was some tragic brain injury and then their behavior changed after this happened. So I would think there would be maybe some correlation to the illness.
Yeah, and he got violent fairly quickly, even
Hmm.
for a serial killer. He began to evolve at age 12. He lived with his grandparents. He was expelled from school. And we know that he had committed crimes that involved cruelty to animals, both cats and dogs. At 12, he said he began relishing attacking women and
Hmm.
stalking young girls, and that those feelings built up and built
Yes.
up and built up, and their fantasies can be acted out and turned to reality. And by the time he was 15, so just 3 years later, he actually attacked a woman on his paper route, stabbing her and fleeing, but he was quickly arrested and not sent to juvenile detention, sent to a mental hospital.
Hmm.
And yeah, he stayed there, Brandy, till he was 16, but then
Yeah.
he ended being in and out of psychiatric hospitals 9 times over the years. So without having knowing about any precursors
Yeah.
prior to the illness, we see kind of a rapid deterioration in his behavior, an increase in his violence after the meningitis, and from age 12 and certainly at age 15. He was diagnosed at one point in the psychiatric hospital with minimal brain dysfunction and an
Mm.
IQ of only about 59.
Mm.
And that is kind of another red flag for me,
Yeah.
because earlier reports about his schooling was that he was a good student. So, you can
Yeah.
kind of tie all of that together. But he certainly was still, functioning as a young man. Matter of fact, he graduated high school in 1973. So even with a estimated lower IQ. He got through high school, graduated. He played football and even received a scholarship to Lane College in Tennessee. So there were some bright points in there, but was he still having these visions? Was he still fantasizing about stalking women? We even know that as a young man, he started boxing and became a Golden Gloves boxer. I mean, that's a pretty elite level. A Golden Gloves boxer, a kid playing football on a scholarship at a college. But then the bottom fell out. And he was expelled from college after just 3 months. And guess what it was for?
Stalking or prowling of some sorts, I would say. It's college.
Yep. And so maybe was it, Brandy, that he was out of that protective environment of high school, grandparents, structure. Now he's placed in a college, maybe put on a little bit of a pedestal. He's a football player. He's on scholarship, Golden Glove boxer, but that's all on the outside.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. And it takes discipline for these things, right? Like it does take some mental capacity to dedicate yourself to these types of activities, which is also very interesting considering his IQ. And we don't typically see that, John, I would say, with people with much lower IQs being able to execute things like this. Usually they turn to drugs and alcohol because they can't find a job or they're not accepted by society. But he starts out well, going into college. Maybe it's the freedom, like you said, lack of boundaries, being able to, or just feelings he's having about these women.
That movie playing in the background. Right? That's kind of how I see this with some of these killers. We see the facade they put on.
Yes.
We have no idea. You and I've said it 100 times, don't get into their mind. That's a really bad place to go. But what is the movie playing in the background? Is he, through all of this, graduating and going to college, still fantasizing about stalking women, murdering women, killing women that have evil in their eyes? And I think it manifested himself when he gets off to college and then he's expelled. Not even a year later, he enrolls at Western Michigan University. And it's not a coincidence that a series of heinous crimes, including murders, started occurring while he was there, including Gloria Steele, who had her throat crushed and was stabbed 33 times. Now, we're going to come back to Gloria in about a decade here of his life, but we know that a series of murders took place at Western Michigan University in 1974, just coincidentally, the time that he went there.
Well, and like you said, he stabs her 33 times, right? So that's overkill. That's anger. That's, I hope we start to maybe talk about how he feels about women. Maybe he's admitted to something, but I don't know the relationship. We're going to get back into her, but 33 times is angry.
Well, but he started fantasizing at 12. And 15, and he stabbed somebody at 15. So when we start seeing that same pattern of behavior, the MO, the weapon, you can start to tie these crimes together. But, looking at kind of the background of him as a serial killer, did he have abusive parents? Yeah, we know that at least his dad was abusive towards his mother. And certainly that's an indicator in a box we check. The TBI, we do know from doctors he did have a very high fever when he had meningitis, and they feared brain injury then. Physical characteristics, big, strong guy, intelligent, a little bit below average or below average. Social skills, though, I think they were good, right? He graduated, he had friends, he played college football. But again, I see that movie playing in the background, that track that started maybe at 8, but certainly at 12,
Yeah.
that kept growing and growing and evolving. And of course, we do know that he did have problems with animal abuse. And so with him, we've got a fairly good laundry list. We have a lot of the boxes checked on precursors to becoming a serial killer.
Yeah, and the big red flag also just being that young of age and not only stabbing someone, but the animal cruelty is like such a big glaring red flag when you're talking about adolescence and what could possibly come into something. But those suspected early crimes, John, he was suspected in slaying Gloria, but there was actually no evidence.
Right, right. Yeah, the police actually thought he was a suspect in that crime. So, more than a coincidence, he was there during that time that she was killed, but they actually had no evidence at all. He was arrested later for assault and battery and sentenced to 1 year in jail. So, he did spend 1 year in county jail, but was released. We know that during the time that he was in the Detroit area, there were at least 3 slayings of women. And he was on the police radar for those slayings. We also know that when he was in Ann Arbor, that the police suspected him of 3 slayings in Ann Arbor, and so much they placed him under 24-hour surveillance.
Wow.
He figured it out, and he skipped town.
Wow.
So he was such a strong suspect at that point that he decided, I got to get out of here. And he did. And he fled to Houston, Texas. And this is the thing I found fascinating, that the police in Ann Arbor thought he was such a strong suspect, but they didn't have the evidence, right? They were waiting for him to mess up, waiting for him to do something, waiting for him to attack somebody, catch him in the act. Couldn't do it. He leaves town. Ann Arbor police pick up the phone and they call Houston PD and say, we think this bad actor is now in your city. But with over 700 murders a year at that time and minimal staffing, he literally blended in with all of the other killers. I mean, and let's face it, during this time period, Brandy, and we've covered a couple of them, there were lots of bodies turning up in the Houston bayous and all around the Houston area. I mean, just think about that. 700 murders a year, and now you have another serial killer added to the mix.
Yeah, I almost wonder if he picked Houston. Specifically picked Houston. Texas in general, there's lots of backlog. There's lots of unsolved. It takes a lot of resources to have cold case departments within police departments. Not everyone has one. So, he picked a good spot to blend in.
Yeah. And if you pick somewhere where they're absolutely overwhelmed with homicides, it's like anything else. If you don't have some leads to go on, if you don't have some witnesses, you don't have some evidence, and we're not talking about DNA in 1973, 74, 75. We're not talking about the things that we have today as far as technology. So if you've got 700 cases, 700 dead bodies out there, and you got little evidence, where are you going to put your time and effort? Into solving the cases you think you can solve, getting the closure you think you can get.
So there were some additional red flags, John, and Carl, and some early crimes. So the temper, we know people started to say he had an explosive temper from a very young age. I would be curious to know if this started after the meningitis. As they did say his behavior changed, so I wonder if this is when the tempers really started to kick in. He stabbed 6 classmates as a teenager.
Yeah, and I don't know because I didn't see any charges that were filed on any of that, so I'm not sure exactly what that was, but it certainly shows his explosive temper, right?
Right. In 1970, he stabbed some girlfriends in Ann Arbor. He broke a girl's jaw. Um, that's very brutal and, just terrible. 1971 armed robbery conviction. Jackson prison at age 17. He's sent at 17 years old. Paroled in 1974, so 3 years later, after he was cleared on a psychiatric evaluation, despite the red flags that he was showing. 1975, he's convicted of assault and battery on Williams and Nizaki and sentenced to 1 year. But then he's diagnosed with anti-personality disorder, extreme violence, no remorse for his crimes, and high likelihood to basically recidivism and try to commit suicide in a psychiatric hospital. So, I mean, gosh, John, this is a lot in someone this age, and the crimes he's already starting to show and commit.
And like we said, he was in and out of these psych units and
Yes.
mental health hospitals 9 different times.
Mm.
And that's where, you get the diagnosis of the anti-personality disorder, the extreme violence, him showing no remorse for what he did. And I think doctors said there's a high recidivism rate here, but they simply couldn't hold him. And again, in and out of these psychiatric hospitals that don't have the ability or have the facilities to hold these people. They try to treat them the best they can. They medicate them, but then they continually get released. We do know that he had a pretty good personality, like many of these serial killers, charming and polite at times, but that he was leaning towards that thrill kill, right? So
Right.
he's not there to sexually assault. He's not really there to collect trophies. He's not there to form some ritualistic routine. Highly disorganized, very impulsive, but he did prefer going after young women, 18 to 25, especially if they had long dark hair. He didn't have a real specific victimology profile that he only went for this one type. But again, from age 12, remember he said he was fantasizing about attacking women and killing women.
John, I almost wonder if it's undiagnosed schizophrenia. Sometimes we covered a case with the guy who had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and these were the types of things he was doing. It was just random, or maybe he was triggered by something that happened to him when he was younger and he was going to go find that person. This is so random and just really disorganized that, and very impulsive. It's almost like something just clicks in him to commit this and to commit it immediately.
Yeah, and we're going to see that as we start diagnosing his MO. What was the trigger? What was setting him off if he was stalking a lot of women, attacking some, and killing others? And we're going to get into all of that in just a minute. Now, on each episode of True Crime and Wine, of course, we feature one of our Casaro Winery brands. And it's fitting that I share with you today what I'm enjoying, which is a glass of Tempranillo, a dry red with notes of fruit like cherries and figs and peppery spices and smoky aromas. Tempranillo pairs wonderfully with barbecued beef, carne asada, and fajitas. It brings out that smoky and spicy flavor in the meat. And of course, there's no better wine to enjoy True Crime and Wine, your favorite podcast, than a great glass of Casaro Tempranillo. And like all of our wines, you can order them at casarowines.com, CASSARO wines.com, and enjoy. Salud.
Okay, John. So we know he spent some time in prison, and then in 76 he was released. But just so our listeners can kind of follow this, he was in Michigan committing crimes, went to prison, fled to Texas, and then he goes back to Michigan.
Yep.
And in May of 76 in Ann Arbor, he kills Susan Tionson, 23 years old, attempted rape, stabbed her to death. That same night, he attacks Glenda Quick, 19 years old, but she survives, ends up being a key witness, and later identifies Watts as the assailant. Is it me, or does this remind me of like Bundy style? Bundy would, I think in the dorm, he went after 2 or 3 in one night. What are you thinking and about this quickness of Susan and then to Glenda?
Yeah, these are frenzied, unorganized attacks. He sees somebody, and again, his trigger is the evil in their eyes, and he decides on some nights, well, I can attack one person. On others, I may attack 2, and we're going to see this pattern go on. What I think is interesting, and I don't know where he's got the money from this. Is he hitchhiking? Is he on a bus? What is he doing? But he's going back and forth between Michigan and Texas, Michigan and Texas. He's in and out of psychiatric hospitals. He's in and out of jail several times during this period. And so the guy is like constantly on the move. And I think a little later, we're going to look at that and realize he was avoiding detection. So although his crimes were very spontaneous, he knew enough to try to save himself and stay on the run and stay ahead of police, at least for the murders.
Well, and that takes some organization, right? Of how long you're going to stay there and then flee. But in 78, he ends up moving in that Houston area to Texas. May 23rd. Back again. So what is it, like a year? Is this
a little over a year? I mean, a little under 2 years that he's in Michigan and committing some of these crimes, and then he goes back to Texas. Yeah.
So he's got Helen Dutcher, 25 years old, May 23rd, 1978, in Friendswood, Texas home, stabs her 20 times while she's in her kitchen cooking. Julie Ann Bauer, 23 years old, again, just 8 days later, June 1st, 1978, stabbed in her apartment. You've got 27-year-old Susan Peterson and 28-year-old Shirley Drouet. And June 17th, 1978, they are stripped naked, tied up in their home. Goodness, this
another double, right?
Another double.
So we've seen this in Michigan. We're now seeing this in Texas, and we're going to continue to see this pattern of behavior. Sometimes one simply isn't enough.
Well, then he goes down to Galveston Beach, where he finds Carla Franklin, 20 years old, on July 15th, 1978. She is stabbed to death on the beach. And then we've got Susan Bainbridge, 25, just a month later, August 24th, 1978, dragged from her car and drowned. I mean, these are so random.
Yeah, and look at the time period. You're talking only May to August. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 victims, in a very, very short period. And yes, some of them, he walks into their house and stabs them while they're cooking. Others in their apartment, others he finds and breaks into their home. Some he finds while he's out at Galveston Beach. Just the random opportunistic of this is overwhelming, and he keeps going. He's on a roll here in Texas of collecting bodies.
Yeah, because there's more Texas victims. We've got Angela Howard, 22 years old, October 20th, 78, stabbed in her Houston apartment 40 times.
Yeah, doesn't that go back to his pattern, Brandy? I know he's got different forms of murder. Yep. He seems to like drowning them, but he really, really enjoys stabbing them. And when he stabs them, it's usually not once or twice. Mm-hmm. What we saw, 120 times, 133 times, this one 40 times. So tons of overkill, tons of rage, trying to get that evil out of their eyes.
Again, we have 2 more that in Texas just in 78, one in October, one in November, one December. So Patricia Maddox was November 12th, beaten and strangled. Virginia Wesson, 22 years old, December of 78, drowned in the tub. But there was evidence in this case.
They're going to find some evidence later on, but the evidence was still pretty weak. And like most of our cases that we cover, we're now finding DNA evidence that is tying him back to some of these victims. And that's why when you said in the opening, 22 confirmed, 80 confessed to, but probably over 100 that he actually did. Just like so many of the cases, 70s, 80s, 90s, we're now using modern technology to go back and tie these guys to the cases. So that, December 78, he finishes a May to December killing spree of Texas women. I think it was a dozen, May to December. And then, for whatever reason, I guess he's had enough of Texas and he goes back to Michigan.
Well, when he goes back to Michigan in 79, he ends up getting a girlfriend and has a child. He married her in 79, and that marriage lasted about 6 months.
Yeah.
Not very long. There are also 5 murders in Detroit area in 1 year where women were attacked and killed. And again, this is when they nicknamed the Sunday morning slasher, but they had no suspects. They weren't identifying anybody with this name. They were just using this name to describe the person that they're looking for, which is Carl Watts.
And how many times have we seen that? In how many different cities have we seen slayings occur when he's there? It could be a coincidence. Detroit's a big city. Lots of women are killed there. Just because he's there doesn't tie him in. But on the same token, we're going to find out that him being in your hometown is not a good thing. During that time period, that 79 time period, he does go back to the D.C. area. As a matter of fact, Maryland, where he was born, even though he only spent a year there, and another murder comes up around the time that he's there. We also see that he travels to Ohio in June of 80, and another murder occurs that we're going to see him eventually confess to. So we're talking about a multi-state murderer. It seemed like his main 2 areas, we start doing geographic profiling, are definitely Michigan and Texas, right?
Yeah.
I think we can say that for sure with the number of attacks. But now we're starting to see that he's taking road trips.
Yes.
And he goes to Maryland and he goes to Ohio, and whether he's avoiding arrest, evading authorities, maybe just reaching out into new areas, we certainly see this pattern of when he shows up, really bad things happen.
Well, and John, I'm also thinking, he goes back, right? He's going back to Houston. He's going back to Michigan, where maybe he's comfortable, maybe he's more comfortable committing these crimes, but he's kind of going back to where he committed these crimes. So then going to other places, I think he is trying to think that investigators aren't going to be able to piece any of these together because of where they're located, harder to detect him. So I think he's probably thinking some of those things, which again is interesting because of how disorganized he is.
Right. Yeah. Now you've got a real paradox there, right, Brandy?
Yeah.
You've got the disorganization and the impulse and the opportunistic murders, but then you have him making conscious decisions to evade authorities when he thinks they're onto him and go to different locations. So even though his murders are disorganized, he's very organized as a criminal.
So in 1980, A woman by the name of Sandra Dalpy is assaulted in Windsor, Canada. So does he now go to Canada?
Yeah, the authorities feel that he just crossed a bridge. You know, Detroit
Okay.
and Windsor, he crossed the bridge, committed the crime, and returned to the U.S. because this was the same time period that Michigan police had launched the Sunday Slasher Task Force and
Wow.
placed him under surveillance. They were in November of 1980 watching him foul a woman home, and they discovered in his car when they finally stopped him, right? They discovered some tools in the car and a book owned by Rebecca Huff. Now, who was Rebecca Huff? Remember in 1979, a year before that, the 5 murders in the Detroit area? Janine Clyde, Shirley Small, Glenda Richmond, Lily Dunn, and 30-year-old Rebecca Huff. So that was in 79. Now, in November of 80, they're watching him, right? He's under surveillance. They see him following a woman. They stop him on a traffic stop. They discover some tools in his truck, but no weapons, no knives, no guns. But they did discover a book owned by Rebecca Huff. But they didn't feel they had enough evidence to charge him. I don't know. You've got a dead girl.
Yeah, whose book is located.
Whose book is located in the suspect of a murder suspect. I don't know.
I mean,
I guess
circumstantial. Take him in, question him a little bit. I mean, you know,
but not enough to arrest him for the crime. I just thought that was just fascinating and an opportunity missed, maybe, right?
Yeah. How many times have we seen that too in these killers?
That's not a coincidence.
That's right.
A dead girl's book in your car is not a coincidence. So what do you think he does after they release him?
He gets out of there. Does he head back to Texas?
Where
this
does
time?
he go? Yep. He goes back to Texas this time. And again, you know, for anyone tracking the case, authorities in Texas, authorities in Michigan, he really doesn't have a strict victim profile. Yeah, we know he likes 18 to 25-year-old, longer hair, brunette, but other than that, that's not a real concrete victim profile. He walks into homes. He finds them at the beach. He sees them in the car. He sees them in bars. We're not, there's just not a really good victimology pattern here. And when we look at the crime scenes, they're all over the place.
Yeah.
They're literally all over the place. Homes, apartments, inside, outside, beach, vehicle. So his disorganization is certainly playing to his advantage as a killer.
Do you think the disorganization was on purpose?
I don't think so. I think he was spontaneous. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I think he was spontaneous. He saw something about certain women. And again, this gets back to that numbers game we talked about. 22 that we know about, 80 confessed to, suspected in over 100. That leads me to believe that there was many, many, many times that he just could not control his impulses and he killed these victims. Now, what we do know, I found this really interesting. We know that he stalked his victims in malls and parks. We know he went to bars. But I found this really interesting. And again, this leads to a very organized killer, not that spontaneous killer. He would bump into women to test if they were vulnerable. He would intentionally shove into women and see how they reacted. And if he thought they were vulnerable, then he would follow them or stalk them or whatever. He often approached his victims and said, "Hey, do you need a ride or do you need some help?" But his attacks were sudden, they were brutal, especially the stabbings. You know, we've talked about that 20 times, 40 times, 33 times. Sometimes he spent less than a minute with his victim. And again, as we said in the opening, how do you get somebody that spends so little time with their victim? But kind of just like the running into the women, these killers evolve and they get better and they get better and they get better. He learned to stab upwards when he was stabbing his victims to minimize the blood spray.
Okay, I didn't know that. I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah, I just thought that was amazing. So we
Wow.
have them here. So we keep saying opportunistic. Can we say planned opportunistic?
Mm-hmm. Honing his craft. I mean, honing his craft, trying to, to not leave as much evidence.
But look at these crimes. Look at these victims. He bumps into them to see if they're vulnerable. If he thinks they're vulnerable and he sees evil in their eyes, he attacks them. But some of them, he attacks and spends less than 1 minute with them. And then he knows enough to stab them in such a way to avoid a lot of blood spray. And then he takes the weapon with him to minimize the physical evidence. That seems very, very organized to me.
Right, which is why I'm like, there's like two spectrums of this guy,
Exactly.
And hitchhiking, we know, was a thing, right? We're talking late 70s, 80s, and people would take rides, right? Sometimes. And, again, it's like you would spend less than 1 minute with someone. So that is literally realizing what you're about to do, planning the attack, stabbing them, actually doing the act, taking the weapon, or watching them die, whatever time he spent, if that mattered or not, and then fleeing. Right. But is that even enough time to see the evil in their eyes? Like, that's why this guy's like throwing me off here.
Is he seeing the evil when he bumps into them?
Yeah.
Is he seeing the evil when he talks to them, offers them rides, offers them help? Does he see it when he stabs them? We don't know. We're this is such a wild headspace. And again, that's why, we choose these cases, Brandy. They're unique. They're fascinating. You can't put some of these guys into boxes like we'd love to, right? That'd be so much easier to solve the case if we could put him in a box. He only attacks these victims. He only attacks them in this way. His MO is always this. But with Carl Watts, he's literally all over the place, and yet he's doing very professional, murderous things that are helping him to get away with these crimes. I invite everyone to follow True Crime and Wine on our social media channels. We can be found at JJ True Crime and Wine on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And if you'd like to receive our monthly newsletter with links to upcoming live shows, wine offerings, true crime trivia, and much more, simply email us at truecrime@casarowines.com. And we'll add you to the newsletter, truecrime@casarowines.com. That's CASSARO, wines plural. And we'll add you to our newsletter.
And he's doing them all over the place, which is going to make it more difficult to identify one suspect in one state versus another suspect in another. But we know he goes back to Texas in 81 and 82. We have another victim, Emily Ricks, 21 years old in September of 81, and Stacy Dawn, and 17 years old, October of 81. But Stacy's a survivor.
Yes. Yeah, it actually survived to testify against him. And so, there's always in the evolution of these killers a place where they mess up. And this is going to be the start of his downfall. As I said, I would love to put this guy in a box, but his victimology, 80% women, attractive brunettes, alone. Some say that there was enough similarity that they resembled his girlfriend. I don't know about that. 70% of them were stabbed, but he attacked them everywhere as far as geographic profiling, homes, beaches, houses. Absolutely crazy. But the killing spree that he went on between February and March of 82 might have been his biggest yet. Might have been the absolute biggest yet.
John, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 victims in this short amount of time. Linda Tilley, 25. Elizabeth Montgomery, 25. Linda was drowned.
Yeah, look how they were
Elizabeth is
killed.
stabbed. Yeah. We choked. Phyllis, 27, was choked and hung.
And then hung her.
And then we have a 14-year-old, Emily, and then we've got a 32-year-old, 34 years old. They're all over the age groups.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, again, trying to profile and put him in a box is really difficult. And his signature is even more difficult than his victimology. Right? We know he covered their mouth to silence their screams. He did rearrange the bodies sometimes. So he spent a little time with some, no time with others, seconds. He didn't collect trophies. He used weapons of opportunity. So we see that in many of his crimes. He grabbed a kitchen knife, right? Yep. And we saw over and over again women that were attacked in their apartments, in their houses, and he grabbed a weapon there or a blunt object. He liked stabbing. We said that over 70% of the time. But other times he would beat and drown his victim. But whatever he did, and I thought this was very interesting from a, evidence standpoint and prosecution standpoint and everything. Everything he did, he really minimized the blood cleanup. And every time he fled quickly. So he knows what he's doing is wrong. Yes. And he's doing it in such a manner that he can get away with it.
Well, and I think that the fleeing quickly, I mean, he's fleeing from state to state to state. Yep. He's not spending much time with them. Like we said, a few of the victims, less than 1 minute to take their life and leave. I don't know if he just isn't worried about what they're going to find. Or if he's just so all over the place that they're not going to correlate these crimes together. Not sure.
Yeah. I mean, we do know he was evasive. He got out of there pretty quickly. He changed clothes. He changed cars. He had no fixed address. He hitchhiked. But what I find really interesting was he having these episodes? Because like the list you just went over, Brandy, we've seen that several times in the show. Sure. He would kill large groups in a very short period of time. Right. And I'm wondering, is this going back to that film that's playing in his mind? Is it going back to the brain injury? Is it he just can't control his impulses, but kind of different? We usually see a very, I would say almost predictable flow with these serial killers, ramping up, killing, depression, ramping up, killing, depression, and the cycle getting faster. But with him, sometimes he's killing in really, really quick bursts in very short periods of time. So kind of a really different killer again.
Yeah, and I'm not sure so much if it is. I think there are like instances of instant trigger, right? Because if you're spending less than 1 minute doing this, that's an impulse kill, right? You're taking their life and you're leaving. Whereas like some of these, when you're drowning someone, I mean, they don't die instantly. You're watching them drown. It takes a while to kill them. Strangulation's the same way. You're looking into their eyes most of the time, taking their life. So I don't know. I'm kind of like in this place of, is it fascination for him to see the struggle in some of them, but then other times is his brain telling him to just kill for no reason and get out?
Yeah, he's literally all over the place.
Yeah.
And this makes it really, really difficult for law enforcement to tie these crimes together. How do you tie crimes together that are so disparate?
Yeah.
I mean, that 60% are in apartments, 20% are in vehicles, 20% are outdoors. The method of murder is not the same. The style attack is not the same. The MO is not the same. It virtually impossible to tie these crimes together. Really, really difficult.
Well, and I think he knew that. And I think that was probably some of the tactics of being able just to go from state to state. But John, he is arrested on May 23rd, 1982. So what do we know about this arrest?
Well, we know that he followed a young lady home from a nightclub, which was his MO. He said he stalked the women at the nightclub, followed them. We saw police, remember, when he was under surveillance, watch him, follow women, stalk women. And we know he followed her home, killed her, and left her in the bathtub where he drowned her. But then he went to another apartment in the very same complex, and he tied up another young female, Melinda, 19 years old. He then filled the bathtub with water to drown the roommate. Well, there was another roommate in the house. And when she found out what was going on, she jumped out of a second-story window and called the police.
Wow.
So officers responded,
and
he was arrested by the Texas Highway Patrol, DPS, after a traffic stop. He was in a stolen vehicle. Oh, my gosh, after all these years of getting away with things, how many times have we seen? We saw that with Eileen Wuornos. We've seen that with several serial killers. They end up stealing a vehicle, and that's why they get stopped.
Yeah.
He was arrested and confessed to 12 murders in Texas.
12, huh? That's like 3 months of murders. What about the rest? I mean, John, how long are we going to be hearing about this guy with DNA testing, right? When we talk about these victims that probably some have been found, maybe some have not been found. But this guy was just so all over the place, committing crimes in multiple jurisdictions. I don't know if we'll ever stop hearing about this guy.
Yeah, no, there's no telling what his body count is, but the case really takes a twist at this point.
Okay.
A turn for the worse, Brandy, because on the day that Watts is supposed to go on trial, right, he confessed to 12 murders. He strikes a deal with the Houston district attorney, and the Houston DA says, hey, in exchange for a guilty plea for the charge of burglary with the intent to commit murder, remember, he broke into the apartment, I'll give you a 60-year prison sentence. So you confess to the court to all 12 homicides. We're not going to charge you with those, but we're going to put you in prison. The DA, I have no idea what he was thinking. This is absolutely, I mean, these guys cut deals all the time to make their record look good and pad their record to get guys off the street. But it is absolutely sickening as a cop, somebody that's been arresting people for 4 decades, to see plea bargain after plea bargain after plea bargain. And these guys know it. They know it. They're going to take the deal. The DA thought it was good. He got this mass murder off the street. He solved a dozen cases because he didn't have a lot of evidence in him anyway. But, oh my gosh.
Well, and that it's like, well, and then you have, burglary with the intent to commit murder. You have a 60-year prison sentence. Is it just the resources, John? Is it the resources of going to trial?
Why wouldn't you try him on one murder?
I know, that's what I'm saying.
Choose your best
we usually
one.
don't see 12 tried murders anyway because of if you're given a life sentence or death, they're not going to, unfortunately, just the way, there's a certain amount of money that they can put into resources and trials and cases. And so if they've got you for one and you're not going anywhere, then the other 11, they're recognized, but they're never actually brought to trial.
They had the murder right there. He drowned the one roommate. The other roommate escaped, was an eyewitness. Why not charge him with burglary with intent to murder for the girl that escaped and murder for the other victim? And however you do it, you can still give him the same deal. We're going to give you 60 years on the burglary. We're giving you life on the murder with no chance of parole. That way you have him in the system.
A 60-year prison sentence bothered me a little bit because would he have an opportunity to appeal some of that? Would there be a chance for parole? I mean, you didn't even give him life with this.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happens, Brandy. There was a Texas technicality.
Oh.
He was granted an appeal, first of all, on a technicality that he was never informed at the trial that water was a deadly weapon. He was trying to drown somebody. So when you're drowning somebody, water can be considered a deadly weapon, but it has to be presented as such. And they didn't do that. Well, he appealed it. He was retried and lost it. But here's the catch. What was he convicted of? Exactly what you said, Brandy, burglary.
Mm-hmm.
And since he was a first-time offender, right, he hadn't been convicted of any other charges in Texas prior to this at all. And since he wasn't convicted of murder, that's why this plea deal was such a ridiculous thing. Yeah. He was eligible for good time behavior and got credit for 3 days credit for every 1 day he spent in jail. And so his entire 60-year sentence was going to be just over 20 years. And Texas was going to have to release him. They had no choice. They were going to have to release him.
See, yeah, that's why, like you said, the whole 60-year out of the gate was a bad idea because this is exactly what happens. And they end up having to be released. So was he released or did they contact Michigan? He's got other crimes in other states, John.
Right. And so authorities know about this at this point, right? They know about the other crimes. They know that he was suspected of other crimes. They call Michigan and say, we messed up. We got to let this guy out. We don't want him out. He's going to kill more people, right? What did his psychiatric evaluation say? The psychiatric evaluation said years ago, high rate of recidivism. He's already killed so many people at this point. Texas calls Michigan. Kind of a thank you for Michigan calling Texas years before and says, we're in a bad situation. We're going to have to let this guy out. Is there any cases that you can try him on? We'll extradite him and maybe you can keep him locked up.
Okay, is this where Gloria Steele comes back in?
Yes.
Okay.
So Michigan authorities remember the case from years before of Gloria Steele. And they put out an appeal to the public and say, hey, this guy is going to be released. And within 24 hours, they had their very first leads.
Wow.
The appeal to the public worked. And Joseph Foy, a witness who had come forward years earlier, called police again and said, I remember seeing that guy with the Helen Dutchner case. I remember seeing him in the alley.
Wow.
And they actually said, how can you remember seeing him from so many years ago in a dark alley? And you know how Watts is fascinated with eyes and the evil in the eyes? Foy tells him, I remember this guy. I'll never forget him because I saw his eyes.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow. Okay, so now they've got some eyewitness testimony, at least it's coming forward. So are they going to use some of this evidence to try him? Are they
So
going to have
now
to
they're
collect
starting to
some evidence?
Yep. So now they're starting to bring some evidence forward from
Okay.
several of the crimes. The Gloria Steele crime from
Yeah.
years ago. They're starting to match the crimes with the victimology. They're starting to match the crimes with the stabbings. 70% of the time, that's what he did. They started matching survivor sketches. Remember, there were a couple of people that actually survived and got away. They started matching fingerprints to the Peterson and Duche murders. And so all of this starts building up. They had found evidence at 10 different crime scenes. And over the years, the evidence kept building and continues until today. The evidence continues till today that we're building more cases on this guy. As a matter of fact, in 2004, DNA linked him to 5 more murders. And so Michigan did a great job on following up on these cases, keeping evidence, preserving evidence, putting it together, and interviewing this guy and letting him talk and letting him tell them, okay, tell us, about what you did in Texas. Tell us what you did in Michigan. Tell us about the young girls at Western Michigan State. Tell us about all of the girls in Ann Arbor, right? The girls in Detroit. And I gleaned some quotes from some of the things that he told investigators, like, I'm going to kill again if you release me.
Yeah, we've
And
heard that before. I mean,
yep,
they
they know it.
they
They
know it.
know they can't control their impulse. And he said killing made him feel good. And for one of the first times, he told investigators when they were asking, why did you kill some? Why did you not kill others? And he said, some of these girls just had evil in their eyes. These guys are so demented, just like the serial killer that I caught, right?
Yep.
And he said when he was asked, why did you kill some and not others? Some women just deserve to die, right? Again, it's this thing that's playing, this film, this movie in the background that we can't see, that we can't understand, but it's going on their head. I thought something was really interesting from one of the interviews up in Michigan. There were 4 officers in the room.
Okay.
Well, actually, 3 officers and Carl in the room. And they said, Carl, about how many people do you think you killed? And he told them, there's not enough fingers and toes in this room.
Oh my God, that just gave me goosebumps.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that's what, 84 times, all right?
Yeah.
10 toes. Yeah.
About
So
80.
80. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Other victims.
oh, John, I'm
and
thinking
again,
this guy is well over 100. Could even be well over 150, in my opinion, the way he was just moving around. And he was killing sometimes multiple a day. I mean, we know of what, 2 or 3 instances when it was at least 2 people in one day.
At least 3 and 2 people in one day, maybe 4. I don't remember.
Yeah, and
exactly.
how many days did he do that? Right, over the span of his career?
And 5 in 1 month.
Yeah.
12 in a 5-month period.
Crazy.
The numbers just kept adding up and adding up. He was convicted in Michigan of the offenses up there, sent to prison. He never was released, so he never did get out, and died of cancer in Jackson, Michigan. Natural causes. So he did not get out again after being caught in Texas. What we know for sure, 22 confirmed, 11 in Texas, at least 7 in Michigan, 4 others. Remember the crimes in Maryland, the crimes in Ohio. He's got other victims that he attacked but didn't murder in Canada. Suspected to 80 to 100. He used kitchen knives mostly to stab his victims. And as I said before, since his arrest, And actually, since his death, the numbers keep growing as different task forces around the country are linking him through his MO and through his DNA and through fingerprints to other crimes that were committed. So here we have Brandy, a serial killer who roamed the country, who was opportunistic, would kill on a whim if he saw evil in their eyes, and yet was smart enough to flee police, change his location, change his clothes, change his cars, and to disappear and keep on the run for years. As we put a cork in this edition of the True Crime and Wine podcast, I want to remind our listeners you can follow us on our socials at JJ True Crime and Wine. You can sign up for our newsletter. You can order wine at CasaroWines.com, CASSARO wines.com. And you can get wine. We'll ship it right to your house. And you can profile these unique and fascinating serial killers in each and every show, along with Brandy and myself. And I think that wraps up our business for today. And I want to, of course, thank my co-host, Brandy Diamond, for joining me on this journey, and our producer, Lauren Bedsole, back in the Corsicana Command Center, for making the show possible. And I invite you to join us on our next episode, where we're going to feature a serial killer who spent over $100,000 outfitting a soundproof trailer to torture and kill his victims. I'm John Matthews, and thanks for joining us on True Crime and Wine. Salute.